Hello and welcome to our weekly look inside Syria. I'm Hazem Sika. Now, the rebels have been gaining strength and becoming more organised, while government forces seem to be slowly withdrawing under the pressure. Last week, opposition fighters say they took control of the Al-Jarrah military airbase in Aleppo province. It was the latest in a string of military airbases to be captured by anti-government fighters. And the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights says the rebels have, for the first time, seized a fleet of Air Force planes that include MiG fighters. The capture of the airfield happened a day after fighters seized the country's largest hydroelectric dam located in the town of Tabqa in the north. The taking of the Euphrates Dam follows the capture of two others in the same area. It supplies electricity to many towns as well as to the city of Aleppo and provides access to Lake Assad, Syria's largest reservoir. The rebels say the dam is operating normally. Its seizure is being called one of the biggest strategic gains by rebel fighters since the uprising began nearly 2 years ago. And on the political front, the Syrian National Coalition says it won't accept President Assad's involvement in any peace talks. The group issued negotiation guidelines after meeting in Cairo. Its members had discussed a proposal by their leader, Muaz al-Khatib, who said he'd be willing to talk to the government. The coalition members insisted they'd negotiate only with people in the regime who have not been involved in the violence. And on Wednesday, the opposition made some headway on the diplomatic front. Members of the Syrian National Coalition said that Qatar has handed over the Syrian embassy to them. The SNC says the building was given to the coalition's newly appointed ambassador Nizar Haraki. The new ambassador to Qatar for the Syrian opposition spoke to Al Jazeera. Here's part of what he had to say.
Of course, we used to have hope for support from the international community and recognition of the National Coalition as the sole legitimate representative of the Syrian people. And we were also hoping for some aid for the revolutionaries inside Syria, in addition to this recognition. But none of this has happened, and even if it has, it was very limited. This affects the coalition in general, but the revolutionaries inside Syria are not widely expecting or depending on foreign support or a foreign solution.
Well, joining me now to discuss the significance of these recent military gains by the Syrian rebels, we're joined by our guests. In Oklahoma City, Joshua Landis, director of the Center for Middle East Studies and an associate professor at the University of Oklahoma. In Beirut, Elias Hanna, a retired Lebanese general. And in Istanbul, Khaled Saleh, head of the media committee for the Syrian National Coalition. Good to have you all with us, gentlemen. Elias Hanna, if I could start with you. First of all, what do you make of these gains by the rebels this week?
I think that the major issue with the rebels in these weeks is, the attempt, or they are trying to make unified command between what is secular, the Free Syrian Army, as well as the Jabhat al-Nusra, and hence this, movement and improvement on the ground at the tactical level. First, they have achieved a lot of things, but we have to wait and see is the regime is changing its priorities and leaving the periphery and going into, in more important issues or places. What's happening in Damascus? We are seeing something changing at the tactical level. We have to wait and see. These gains, like the air bases that around Aleppo, are they important? Are they functional? Do the airplane there still functional? Do we have pilots? Is it capable? I mean, the Jabhat al-Nusra or the Free Syrian Army, are they capable to use them in an operational point of view? We have to wait and see, but still there is a gain at the tactical level. Now, this tactical level gains are not really reaching a point of strategic inflection. We have to wait and see.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about the value of these gains then. If the rebels were to capture the two airports, Elias Hanna, would it be a symbolic blow as well to the regime? And could that perhaps shift the strategic balance in northern Syria at least?
It is not a symbolic, it's a big blow for the regime first. First, they are denying the regime to use these air bases first. Second, they are taking over all what is inside on these places, like airplanes for training or for, fighters. Moreover, the regime is leaving the northern side, like Al-Hasaka. It is totally under the control of the rebels, whether Jabhat al-Nusra or Free Syrian Army. Yes, it is a big blow, but Is it intended big blow? We have to wait and see. I mean,
but would
this
they
regime
would they remain vulnerable to attack by Assad's air force, which
Yes,
regularly bombs areas after the rebels take them?
Yes, for sure, they will stay vulnerable for some attacks. Moreover, we have to wait and see, these rebels, are they capable to shift from non-irregular conventional way of fighting or doctrine into something conventional? Not yet, I guess. So, but it is a big blow for the regime. It is more psychological now than, strategic or operational.
Joshua Landis, how much significance should we place for both sides in this war on controlling key infrastructure like this?
Well, I think it's big. Aleppo is clearly the object of the Northern alliances, of the rebel object. They're going to get the airport, the international airport, try to cut off Aleppo and slowly take it. Because until today, the biggest vulnerability has been that the rebels have not taken any major city. If they can take Aleppo, then foreign aid can begin to get into Turkey. There are a lot of aid organizations that are hovering around the border at Turkey, waiting to try to get in to have safety. Now, of course, the Air Force, the Syrian Air Force, is making it dangerous enough that many of them don't dare to come in. But what we need to see, or what the rebels need to see, in the north of Syria, is beginning to construct some kind of government that can make it appealing to Syrians to leave the Syrian government and to join the rebel cause. Because today, the amount of disorganization, the amount of criminality, kidnapping, makes it very hard for many of the Syrians in Damascus and other places that are going to have to be conquered next to abandon the government. And that's what the real challenge will be once the military battlefield has been loosened up in the north, is to create some kind of stability, some kind of food, some kind of institutions that can replace the Syrian government and give some kind of confidence to Syrians that they're not just jumping off the cliff when they join the rebels.
Khaled Saleh, I know this is something to be optimistic about when you hear about the gains that rebels have made this week in the conflict. But the next question becomes, how will they be able to consolidate those gains?
Well, there are several things that are taking place. A couple months ago, we formed the first Syrian Chief of Commands to really try and coordinate between all the different brigades that are fighting on the ground, between the different FSA units. Over the last 6 weeks, I know I've been involved and I've seen some major plans to really start taking over some of the major cities. And that's what we saw in the last 15 days. The movement started from Deir ez-Zor with the fall of Al-Amn al-Siyasi over there, Mabna al-Ta'minat, the Ta'minat office, Al-Khidmat also fell into the hands of the rebels. The rebels from there moved into Hasaka as well. Shaddadi, which has a major oil field, fell into the hands of the rebels or was liberated. We have movements in Raqqa as well, where for the first time the rebels were able to control Sadd al-Furat, the Furat Dam. The significance of that dam is for the first time Deir ez-Zor was cut off completely from electricity for the last 3-4 months, and electricity is back. Electricity is actually also back in the industrial city in Aleppo. We have movements in Aleppo as well. We have movements in Dar'a. Perhaps also what happened on the 8th of February, where elements from the Al-Islam Brigade entered Al-Muhallaq Al-Janubi. Tanks actually from the Syria Liberation Front entered into the city of Damascus. It was a major blow to the regime. What we are working on right now is consolidating all these gains, making more movements to liberating a couple of the provinces, which I expect that to happen in the next 3 to 4 weeks. Outside of that, we're trying to organize the local administrative councils in these different areas. On the 1st of March, the Aleppo province is going to actually hold the first free elections in that province in Syria since about 50 years. So we're very excited about the gains that we've made over the last couple of weeks.
Well, the United States has a new top diplomat in Washington, but when it comes to the world's biggest diplomatic crisis, John Kerry says he's struggling for ideas. He says the U.S. is considering its next move in Syria, and despite the latest reports of open warfare in the capital, he says he's still hoping to find a diplomatic solution.
Evaluating now, we're taking a look at what steps, if any, diplomatic, particularly, might be able to be taken in an effort to try to reduce that violence and deal with the situation.
So Joshua, Landis, a new U.S. Secretary of State and perhaps a fresh pair of eyes looking at this conflict, but will that make a difference here?
United States does not want to get involved militarily in Syria, and that's what I think Kerry was underlying, trying to give some hope that diplomacy could work. It seems quite clear that we're still a long way away from diplomacy. We just saw this attempt by Khatib, the head of the Syrian coalition, opposition coalition, who said on his Facebook in a rather unconventional way that he would be willing to talk to the regime. This set off a firestorm of protest from many opposition people. It showed how disorganized the opposition is. But Assad didn't really do anything to meet it. He said that Ali Haidar, a sort of low-level government person, could meet him. But the point, I think, is that the West jumped on this initiative. They want to open some kind of corridor of dialogue. At the same time, most analysts are saying the military balance of power needs to shift in Syria. And the West is going to continue to support the opposition. Saudi Arabia, Qatar give more and better arms, and we're seeing those more and better arms coming in to Syria to change the balance of power, as we're seeing in Aleppo and so forth. And this, perhaps, will pressure Assad to come to the dialogue table. But I don't think many people are very optimistic that that's going to happen anytime soon.
Khaled Saleh, do you expect the U.S. position to change on this anytime soon?
We're monitoring the situation in the U.S. and their position very closely. They send us positive signals here, now and then. Unfortunately, the U.S. is letting the Syrians fight this war by themselves. I know that the U.S. is providing relief support to Syrians. But if you talk to people on the ground, whether revolutionaries, people, just ordinary people, they want to see this over with. And unfortunately, without supplying the Syrian chief of commands with the ability, with good equipment that are able to really, especially anti-aircraft missiles, anti-tank missiles, we're going to continue struggling for a while. What happened with the control of Al-Jarrah airport, for example, the rebels got about, I think, 20 Cobra missiles, which are going to be helpful for us to shoot some of these Syrian airplanes when they come and attack civilian areas. However, until now, the U.S. has not made that decision. I think what we're trying to do is to really make our case in front of them. Until now, we've focused on the humanitarian aspect of what's going on in Syria. But at this point, we're really making the case that it is in the strategic interest of the U.S. to help us. What's happening in Syria has an impact on Iran, which we know tries to control Syria, tries to control Lebanon, tries to control Iraq. And I think it will be a major blow to the Iranian government when Syria is liberated from their control.
Elias Hanna, can the United States be doing more? Are they in a position to do more?
I think that there is some paralysis at the international level, and the United States of America is really pivoting to Asia and lately to Northern Africa. There is a lot of problems. I think that everybody is following the low-cost strategy, leave it for the regional power. And I want to go a little bit earlier to what Joshua said about creating government in northern Syria. Everything in that area, I think really depends what Turkey wants in that area. And if you want to create a government, you need like a dramatic situation changing, major shift of balance of power internally. When you talk about Aleppo, we are talking about 1.5, 1.3 million people over there. You have pro-Assad, you have against Assad, so who is going to control them? Moreover, there is a lot of fault lines or schism between what is secular and what is religious at that time. Now, the United States of America, lately, the vice president in Munich conference issued like a statement or a message for the Russian to come and cooperate about Syria. I think we're still far away from this thing. And now, what really depends or what really may change this paralysis at the international level is what's happening internally, the tactical level. As much as the rebels achieve more gains, as much the shape of the international initiative will change. But so far, these rebels needs more and more and more. And it seems that President Assad is still strong.
All right, well, let's talk a little bit more about what the opposition side has been doing this week. On Monday, the head of the Syrian National Coalition, Moaz al-Khatib, was speaking to reporters in Cairo. It happened after his meeting with the head of the Arab League, Nabil al-Arabi. He says the Assad regime's actions may have made foreign intervention necessary.
We reject any foreign intervention when the regime is being just. But when the regime is not just and slaughters its own people, the options, as in this case, are open. People cannot tolerate this anymore.
Khaled Saleh, I presume that many people in your group will echo the sentiments expressed by Moaz al-Khatib. But in the long run, will it make any difference?
We've asked for international intervention now since March of 2011. Unfortunately, we have not received the support that we've continued to ask for. And, you know, the Syrians on the ground are left on their own to defend themselves and I think that's what you're seeing right now with the gains that we're having on the ground. The international community has two choices. They can either sit on the sideline and watch Assad, watch Iran, and watch Russia really kill Syrians, or they can intervene and really save loss of bloodshed and bring this to an end. Unfortunately, we're continuing with the political process. We're continuing with the military process, and we were hoping that the Friends of Syria will be a lot more involved compared to what they are doing. We get lots of promises, we get lots of words, but when it comes down to it, I think we still have not received the support that we need, even from a relief perspective. If you think about this, does that
reluctance, Khaled Saleh, come partly from the fact that there remains this disconnect between your group and what the rebels on the ground are doing, and that many people outside of Syria have this reluctance to fully back the opposition, whether it's your group or the rebels, because they're really not sure what they're getting here?
I think there are definitely some legitimate concerns over there. Now, I was part of the Syrian National Council when it was formed, and I represent the Syria Liberation Front, Jabhat Tahrir Syria al-Islamiyya. This is the largest front, fighting front on the ground. I'm part of their political office. These are basically Al-Faruq, Suqur al-Sham, Liwa al-Islam, which entered the tanks into Damascus. It also contains Suqur al-Kurd. But for a long time, we did not talk about the fact that there are many of us who actually represents the revolutionaries, the forces on the ground as part of the SNC. We're taking a different strategy right now in the Syrian coalition, where we are saying, listen, we are part of this political process. We were very careful to be part of this process because we wanted to really help shape the political future of Syria. When you have the elections coming up in Aleppo and we're helping organize that, we're actually going to be inviting international monitors. We're going to be inviting the UN, the Arab League, the Conference for Islamic Countries to come and actually watch the elections in Aleppo on March 1st. I think that sends a very strong signal about how much control we have on the ground and the kind of interaction between the people on the ground, the local administrative councils on the ground, and the political organizations that represent that revolution.
Joshua Landis, what do you make of Moaz al-Khatib's latest moves this week? And does he truly represent the Syrian opposition, in your view?
Well, the problem is that nobody really knows who's representing the Syrian opposition. And we've heard a very optimistic picture of how the opposition is getting united and the civilian leadership is in control of the situation on the ground. But most analysts believe that the Supreme Military Council that was formed at the same time as a national opposition coalition isn't really in command of anything. And that we've seen several fronts. The Islamic front, which is Ahrar Sham, which has been at the forefront of liberating most of these air forces. And then there is the Liberation Front, which hasn't really been taking orders from Idris, the man who was put in charge of this. Now, he's supposed to be very capable, but whether he's really calling the shots or not is dubious. So the civilian leadership outside is claiming that they're sitting on top of this and that they're in charge, but I don't think anybody believes that they really are in charge. It's the men with the guns who are doing all the dying and are fighting like mad on the ground, who are in charge of this. And at the end of the day, they're going to be the ones who are calling the shots. And they're cooperating together better, but there's a lot of underlying competition. And this is what frightens people. And we've seen, for example, in Shadadi and near Hasake, that was just liberated by rebels, 40,000 people ran away from the town when it was being liberated. That's not the kind of vote with your feet that the rebels want to see. Many Christians, there was just a big story in the New York Times about how Christians from Hasake in the north and Qamishli are all fleeing into Turkey because they're frightened and they're being kidnapped, and there's great disorder on the ground. And this isn't a situation which is reassuring either to the West or anybody else. And the notion that the West is going to step in and somehow get into a hotter war with Iran. The West is helping Syrian rebels a lot. And so is Saudi Arabia and Qatar. The
Elias
notion
Hanna,
that they've been abandoned, I think, is a bit radical.
Is it the men with the guns that are calling the shots here, as Joshua Landis puts it?
Yes, I do agree with Joshua, because, you know, all resistance, all rebels all over the world in the history of revolution and the resistance, they start like this, you know, and at the end they will try to create a unified command. But what is really separating these, you know, units and this resistance is many fault lines, many levels of, you have the exterior and you have the interior, and you have the secular and you have the religious, and you have the regional and you have the central, and you have the ethnic and you have, you know, the Arab and the Kurds. You have a lot of things that really, the fault lines are, you know, very difficult. And I think that maybe you are talking about the coalition today. Maybe in the future we won't see anybody of these coalition figures, you know, maybe. Why? Because I'm sure, and I'm not maybe, because, you know, the things on the ground will create their own elites later, as it happened in Iraq. I mean, the people who came with the American to Iraq are not the people who are really governing Iraq of today. So we are in a shift, or a generational shift at all levels. And I think the problem was still at the beginning of it in Syria. The problem is very big, as Joshua said, yes.
All right, I'll give the last word to you, Khaled Saleh, just in the minute that we have left. Obviously, a lot of people still have to be convinced about what your group can do here.
Let me talk about the Syria Liberation Front, the Islamic Liberation Front of Syria, Jabhat Tahrir Syria al-Islamiyya. We are part of the Syrian Chief of Commands. We coordinate very closely with General Idris. As a matter of fact, lots of the plans that were put that you see on the ground in Aleppo and Idlib today, by the way, we started some major movements as well in Deir ez-Zor. Those were plans that were put by the advice of General Idris and the core group around him. We represent about 50% of the Syrian Chief of Commands. And like I mentioned, I'm part of the political office. I advise Mr. Mu'adh al-Khatib as well on political issues. So we're working very closely. And I think the situation on the ground in the next 3 to 4 weeks is going to change tremendously.
All right. And on that, we've got to leave it. My thanks to all three of our guests, Joshua Landis, Elias Hanna, and Khaled Saleh. Many thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
Well, away from the halls of power and diplomacy, the conflict in Syria has continued to tell its own story through the images that photographers have given us over the past 12 months. And on Friday, the prestigious World Press Photo Awards for 2013 were announced in Amsterdam. Perhaps not surprisingly, photos from Syria have dominated this year's winners. Here are just 3 of them from among the winners, and we want to warn you, some of the images are disturbing. Rodrigo Abd of the Associated Press won first place in the General News Singles category for this close-up of a severely injured woman crying after her husband and 2 children were killed when the Syrian army shelled her house in the north. Fabio Bucciarelli from Agence France Presse took the award for Spot News' second prize for a series of pictures from Aleppo. In this one, a Free Syrian Army fighter takes up a position during clashes against government forces in the Suleiman Halabi district. And in the General News First Prize Stories category, Alessio Romenzi took the award for Syria Under Siege. Among them, a young man holding a seriously wounded man in the neighborhood of Baba Amro in Homs. Some very powerful images there. Well, that's just about it for this edition of Inside Syria. Remember, Al Jazeera has extensive coverage of what's going on in the country, not just on this program, but our on-the-hour news bulletins and online at aljazeera.com. I'm Hazem Sika. Thanks for joining us. The latest news is next.